thoughts can range from the bizarre and nonsensical to the disturbing and unsettling, causing many of us to question our nature, our character, and our sanity. But I want to start by emphasizing a crucial point. Intrusive thoughts don't define you. They don't reflect your character, your desires, or your intentions. They're not an indication of who you are as a person. Intrusive thoughts are a universal aspect of the human experience. They're as common as they are varied, and they occur in the minds of all people from all walks of life, regardless of age, gender, cultural background, or mental health status. Everyone experiences these fleeting and sometimes troubling thoughts. The content of these thoughts might differ from person to person. Some may involve irrational fears, others may be violent, sexual, or blasphemous in nature. But the experience of having such thoughts is something that we all share. And yet, despite how common they are, intrusive thoughts can be incredibly distressing, particularly because they often seem so alien to our values, beliefs, and sense of self. To understand why we have these thoughts and why they can be so distressing, we need to take a closer look at the workings of the human mind. The brain is a marvel of evolution, an organ of immense complexity that processes vast amounts of information every second. Our brains are constantly at work, even when we aren't conscious of it. They're processing sensory input, managing our bodily functions, solving problems, planning for the future, and much more. And as part of this ceaseless activity, the brain is also generating thoughts, some of which are logical and purposeful, and others that seem random or irrelevant. One of the key reasons we experience intrusive thoughts is because of the brain's capacity for imagination. Human beings are unique in the animal kingdom in our ability to imagine scenarios that have never happened and may never happen. This ability to imagine, to explore possibilities, is one of the most powerful tools that we have. It allows us to solve problems, to innovate, and to plan for the future. It enables us to empathize with others, to create works of art, and to understand complex concepts. But this imaginative capacity also means that our minds are capable of generating thoughts that are out of sync with reality. Thoughts that are irrational, nonsensical, or even disturbing. For example, you might be driving down the highway and suddenly you imagine yourself swerving into oncoming traffic. Or you might be holding a baby and suddenly have the thought of dropping them. These thoughts aren't reflective of your desires or intentions. They're simply the result of your brain's natural tendency to explore different scenarios, even those that are undesirable or unlikely. This tendency is often referred to as the brain's negativity bias, a survival mechanism that's evolved over millions of years to keep us safe. The negativity bias, which I've mentioned in a previous video, means that our brains are more likely to focus on potential dangers and negative outcomes, even processes, particularly the interaction between the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the amygdala. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for higher order thinking, decision making, planning, impulse control, and reasoning. It's what allows us to weigh options, consider consequences, and make rational choices. When an intrusive thought occurs, the prefrontal cortex may generate it as a part of a what-if scenario. It's the brain's way of considering all possibilities, no matter how unlikely or undesirable. However, because the thought is out of sync with our values or desires, it triggers a sense of conflict. This is where the anterior cingulate cortex comes in. This part of the brain is involved in error detection and conflict monitoring. It's like a mental alarm system that alerts us when something doesn't fit with our expectations or goals. When this cortex detects conflict, such as a thought that's inconsistent with our values, it sounds that alarm, flagging the thought as problematic or significant. At the same time, the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, gets involved. The amygdala is responsible for processing emotions, particularly those related to fear, anxiety, and threat detection. When an intrusive thought triggers the brain's alarm system, the amygdala amplifies the emotional response, making the thought feel more significant, more distressing than it actually is. This emotional amplification can create a vicious cycle where the distress caused by the thought makes it seem even more important, which in turn increases the distress. But here's the crucial point. This entire process is automatic. It happens below the level of conscious awareness, and it doesn't reflect your intentions, desires, or character. It's simply the way the brain is wired, a product of millions of years of evolution designed to keep us safe from harm. Unfortunately, this system isn't always perfect. It can overreact, flagging harmless thoughts as threats and causing unnecessary distress. It's also important to recognize that intrusive thoughts are not a sign of mental illness. While they're often associated with conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, and depression, they're also experienced by people who don't have any of these conditions. In fact, studies have shown that people who don't have any of these conditions, actually more than 90% of people experience intrusive thoughts at some point in their lives. These thoughts are a normal part of the human experience. They're a byproduct of a healthy, functioning brain, not a sign that something is wrong. Understanding the science behind intrusive thoughts can be incredibly empowering. When you know that these thoughts are just the result of your brain doing what it's designed to do, you can begin to let go of the fear and anxiety they provoke. You can learn to see them for what they are: fleeting, meaningless mental events that have no bearing on your true self. One of the most effective ways to manage intrusive thoughts is through mindfulness. As I've covered before, mindfulness is the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It involves observing your thoughts, feelings, and sensations with curiosity and acceptance rather than trying to suppress or control it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Practicing self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a friend who's struggling. It means recognizing that everyone experiences intrusive thoughts and that these thoughts don't define you. By cultivating self-compassion, you can reduce the shame and guilt that often accompany intrusive thoughts, allowing you to move through them with greater ease. It's also helpful to understand that the brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to anticipate what might happen next based on past experiences, current inputs, and various possibilities. This predictive nature of the brain can sometimes lead to intrusive thoughts as the brain considers all possible outcomes, including those that are irrational or undesirable. The brain is wired to prioritize survival, which means it's more likely to focus on potential threats and negative outcomes. This is why intrusive thoughts often have a negative or distressing quality. They're the brain's way of trying to keep us safe, even if the perceived threat is imaginary. Moreover, intrusive thoughts can be influenced by other factors, including stress, fatigue, and even certain medications. When we're stressed or tired, our brains are more likely to generate intrusive thoughts as they struggle to process and manage the additional demands placed on them. Certain medications, particularly those that affect neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, can also influence the frequency and intensity of intrusive thoughts. Understanding these factors can help you approach intrusive thoughts with a greater sense of perspective. When you recognize that these thoughts are often the result of external factors like stress or fatigue rather than a reflection of yourself, you can begin to take steps to address those underlying causes. This might involve managing stress through relaxation techniques, ensuring you get enough sleep, or working with a healthcare provider to adjust your medication if necessary. Finally, remember that you aren't alone in experiencing intrusive thoughts. Everyone has them, even if we rarely talk about them. The next time an intrusive thought enters your mind, remind yourself that it's just a thought, one of the thousands that your brain generates every day. It doesn't mean anything about you as a person, and it doesn't have the power to define you. Acknowledge it, let it pass, and go on about your day, knowing that you are much more than the random and fleeting thoughts that your mind generates. So in closing, intrusive thoughts are a normal and natural part of the human experience. They are the result of a highly active and imaginative brain. A brain that is constantly thinking, imagining, and exploring different possibilities. These thoughts don't define you. They don't reflect your character, your intentions, or your desires. By understanding the science behind intrusive thoughts, practicing mindfulness, cultivating self-compassion, and managing stress, you can learn to navigate these thoughts with greater ease and less distress. Remember that you aren't alone in this experience, and that you have the power to move through these thoughts without letting them control you. So, if there are other topics you'd like to see me cover on this channel, please leave your suggestions